Thank you. I'm happy to see this big crowd because it's Saturday and you could also have been enjoying the sun that returned. So I'm going to try and do my best. And try is really the key word here, because this is the first time I'm going to do this talk, which is always extra exciting for me. And also it's about a topic that is basically this new and uncovered. I haven't found anybody covering a talk on this topic before. So on YouTube, there's nothing. You end up blank, which is nice in this era. You can ask AI to make a talk out of it. I tried, doesn't really work. So, well, this is my best effort, and I hope you'll enjoy it. Who already knows the concept of social debt? Anybody aware with it? Yeah. Oh, I see one hand. Please come and talk to me afterwards, because then I want to learn something. So yes, it's a very uncovered topic yet. So let's try and find some things out together today. So let's start with a story like how I entered into IT at a company, insurance company, where we had a problem, a technical problem. We were in COBOL. We were on a combination of databases and COBOL that we couldn't open up on the web. And we were heading into the digital era. So we thought, well, we're going to copy how everybody else does it. And let's try where we're heading at. So what we thought was, well, we have to do a greenfield rebuild, because this is what all the great logos on the previous slide were doing. So because if we do that, we're going to have great stories. We will end up being public speakers. That worked. We have happy developers. We have higher quality. We can solve everything if we do a greenfield rebuild. We will have better collaboration. We can also do an agile transformation while we're at it, because everything is going to change. And of course, yay, we'll have better business revenue also. So we started because we thought, well, a greenfield rebuild will make us one of these unicorn companies. Everybody will come and work with us because, well, it's going to be one of these awesome companies to work for. So 2014, we started. We thought, well, let's do microservices. That was very little known. Let's do full-blown CI/CD. We had no idea. I really asked some questions to Jess Humble, and he said, well, I don't know. I didn't run this in production yet, so good luck. Okay, thank you. And we thought, well, then we'll have a cultural change, which we also needed because we were bit of a dominant company. So if we have distributed systems, we can do this inverse Conway, and we will have a very pleasurable culture. So that's what we tried. And much to my surprise, it kind of worked. So, oh, I'm going too fast. So it worked. We went to production. A lot of things changed. Even it ended up in some people in the higher senior leadership being fired because they didn't fit the culture anymore. So I thought, well, now I know how it's done, so moved to another company, and we thought, let's try it again. So we'll just shove in some tools and some tech. Of course, again, microservices, some different thingies. We wanted to go to the cloud as well, do infra as code, config as code, some immutable infrastructure was also one of these buzzwords. So yes, we had all the X's marked there. And then, much to my surprise, it didn't work. So I thought, how can this be? I'm using the same concepts, the same tools, the same architectures, some of the same people, because we went with more than just me. But it didn't work. So we were all there waiting for the big launch. And actually, it was because, well, this particular company had promised their customers, I think around 3 times, that they were doing an awesome greenfield rebuild and it would solve all their problems. And the customers had been on the tables applauding that. And 3 times they didn't deliver. So in this case, the director said, well, we cannot go live. If we go live now, after promising 6 years of innovation, we cannot come with this little result. Yeah, but we've only been building for 3 months, so it's not big yet. No, but we have to wait. So we couldn't test it in production. We couldn't go through production. And between teams, there was very little collaboration because while the whole company was focusing on these rebuilds, there was a group which was sitting in the back that was all times basically serving the customers. They were, in a group of 20, actually keeping the company alive. And while they were doing that, everybody called them dinosaurs instead of acknowledging them for their efforts. They were the uncool people, but they were actually saving the company. And because they were never acknowledged in that, no way were they helping the innovation teams to be successful. They were actually working against that. They were keeping their systems closed. Like, no, not on my watch. You're not entering my system. And we had a lot of deployments, but never a release. So all our feature toggles were turned off. There was no way that we could test, does what we are doing actually work? And failure was also not an option. So the directors of this company, they also became a director due to certain promises. When we saw there was some systems with very high tech debt, and we thought you should turn them off, you should stop this, we should focus on the new things where we're heading at. They said no, because it was too big to fill. They couldn't fill the system that was their entry ticket to their position. So we were stuck. And that's when it really hit me, like, okay, the relationship is the other way around. It isn't that a greenfield rebuild leads to this unicorn company. No, if you are able to be this unicorn company with the people that you're working with, then you are able to do a greenfield rebuild. Otherwise, don't even try it. Probably don't even try it if you are this unicorn company. It's really hard. So in the end, it boils down to this. And I've seen this message in multiple talks over the last few days. Software is built by people. So we focus a lot on all the tech. And it's not that it's not important, because it's where we actually find each other, where we connect with each other. But in the end, it's built by people. So we should also pay sufficient attention on how do we work together, what are our beliefs, how do these beliefs translate into the behavior that we're adopting in the team? Are there any points of stress? Are there any points of pain, any points of trauma? Those are relevant questions. And we're asking them too few, too little. So, and that was already found by Melvin Conway. So who's aware of Conway's law? Yes, it's quite well known. So it's already in 1968 that he found that any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. If you read the article, it's my personal belief that the word he would today be using is social structure. There wasn't really a word back then. So, because of how he talks about it. But you're inevitably bound to copy the social structure of your company into your systems. If you think about that, it also means that a direct implication of that is that your system will inherit your social dysfunctions. Does that make sense? So if your team members are not talking to each other, your code is not integrating. If your team members are not working together with this other team, then your code is again not integrating. If your architect is somewhere in an ivory tower, no way people are going to follow his patterns or his advice. Also because there's no feedback loop going on there. So your system will inherit your social dysfunctions. So if you don't have a clear structure, if you have a change in direction, so your business ambitions change, and you don't take people along, well, it's going to be a social dysfunction. Social conflict, misalignment in teams, a culture of fear. People don't dare to challenge the status quo. It will end up in your system. You will see that people don't understand it and also don't believe it, and they are disengaged. And there is a lack of ownership. So, and this is the concept of social debt. So this was the brief introduction to what actually is this concept. Well, we all know technical debt. And this is basically the people and process counterpart of it. So it's the cumulative cost connected to adverse effects within a developer community. It's only a cumulative cost if there's actually an impact. So it doesn't mean that you have to be best friends with anybody in your team, because not drinking beer every day does not lead to worse code. So it's only when it has an impact on how you are able to do your job that it's called social debt. So I've seen the very few articles that are written about that sometimes already not respecting these boundaries. Like, oh, but these people are not feeling fully best friends with everybody else. You don't have to. You don't have to be best friends with everybody in your team. Actually, it's very functional if you're not. So this is the definition of social debt. And then, of course, if you compare it with technical debt. So technical debt is the accrued work that is owed to the IT system, while social debt is the accrued work that is owed to the IT team. It is where leadership should have taken care through attention, through guidance, through empowering and enabling you to do your job, and where they failed. So this is the work that is owed to the IT team. You actually were entitled to receive this attention and this guidance and this empowerment. In tech debt, there's code smells. And in social debt, there's community smells. So it's a whole list that people have thought of. And you can repay it through investment in code when it's tech debt. But if you owe something to people, you have to repay it through people and processes. That kind of makes sense, I hope. So, time to introduce myself first. I'm a mother of two. I like traveling, so I'm here basically because I really love Athens. Cycling, vintage shopping, bought a new pair of pants here, and I love playing board games. I'm a CTO at a company called Schuberg Phyllis, and basically it's a group of people with no managers who loves to do the right things for very complex customers. That's me, very briefly. So, an introduction to social debt. As I promised, I'm going to try and give you an overview today, because, well, except for one person, nobody even knows the concept. That also means something for the structure of this talk. I cannot deep dive into everything. I'm going to try and give you an overview, and I'm going to try and publish in the next few months. So if you're interested, follow it for more detailed insights, because otherwise, well, we'll get lost in the story. So basically what I'm going to share is, what is the impact? So why should you even care about social debt? So why are you in this room? What causes social debt? How can you identify that you have it, and how can you repay it? How can you get it away once you have it? So let's start with impact. So I actually like the logo of Devoxx, bringing developers together. That's actually what it's about. It matters. So in research, they have found that social debt, when you measure it, and when you compare it to the impact of the architecture chosen, or the language chosen, or the domain of the system, or whatever, social debt is the main predictor of software quality. That is something. It is also the main predictor of technical debt. So this is kind of the effect that was hiding behind the thing we were observing. This is the thing that was influencing your whole team's performance. And it was kind of hidden in the background. So it's good to unmask it and to uncover it. That's at least how I think about it. So if you don't believe me, here's a quick example. We had a new guy joining our team, and we were so pressured that nobody had time to actually guide him. So he started to self-guide him. We had a lot of Confluence pages. He started reading that. He didn't want to bother anybody. But actually, we failed this guy in buddying him. So what happened is every day he felt more depressed when driving home, because he didn't feel he was earning his salary. He was feeling he was free riding. He was not adding any value. And also, he felt not attached to the team anymore. So after a while, he thought, yeah, I'm just not part of it. You just do your thing. I'll just try if nobody can see me. So, and the worst thing is, when we looked at the code that he was delivering, well, he also didn't adhere to the architecture and not to the processes that we had set up. No surprise there, of course. So I think many people will recognize this in some shape. We really did a bad job there. This is social debt. This is attention owed to the newbie. Another example is there was a company that I was consulting for, and they, right from their existence, they came into the market because they wanted to make the insurance market transparent and equal. So there was a lot of hidden pricing wars and everything going on, and their culture of equality kind of became their caricature. So they kind of went it in overdrive, which is called hyper-community. This is a form of groupthink where you're not even allowed to challenge, hey, maybe I have a different opinion. So what they did, they started to conform to everybody. They started anchoring. So the one person's opinion was followed by everybody. So in the end, they ended up with code that was so much dependent of one another, they couldn't release it anymore. Which made sense, because they did everything together. They did never want to allow to centralize some of the components into internal libraries and assign ownership, because ownership was against their culture, because they wanted equality. So that was the community smell of hyper-community. We helped them solve it, actually by creating these libraries and dividing ownership over the various teams, still respecting equality, but also delivering some accountability and some ownership and some responsibility, because they needed it. Their code was a mess. So we were facing faulty software components. And this one also was really nice. A company, bank I'm working for, they did a large-scale agile transformation. And what they did is they introduced something they called simplify at scale, which is so simple that it will take you at least 6 months to get anything approved to go to production. Recognize that? So they had some kind of bureaucracy-driven design where when we would engage with their developers, they would say, yeah, if we have all these things in configuration, we don't have to ask approval to put configuration changes on the backlog or to release them to production. So what they started doing is optimize to put everything in configuration, which you can actually take a long way. But you can understand how that impacts software quality, right? This is not how you should design it. So these are just some fast examples. I hope they speak to mind. Because in the end, it's always the organization, which was a slide of Sander. And indeed, it is always the organization. I think that almost all technical debt can be traced back to something where the organization failed to set people up properly. So why do we focus so much on the code? Of course, because it's fun. But if we want to solve these problems and have more fun writing awesome code, we need to solve them with the people, which is just a different focus. We need to uncover what are these patterns that are really dysfunctional between people. So I hope you're following that. So how do you actually incur social debt? Well, basically, there's people change, process change, tech change, and business change. And any change, well, there was this person who once told me, well, what kind of leader do you want to be? Do you want to be like a bird and you're flying high over and you sometimes drop your shit and you just move on? And it always stuck to my mind. Like, oh yeah, okay, so whenever I want to change something, I have to take time to stop, to discuss, to tell again, like, what is the purpose? Where are we going? To see, does it actually work? Do we need to adjust? Open for feedback. You need to have time for these conversations. And when I look around me, there is so few leaders who actually take this time. I think many leaders are like this bird flying over, dropping their shit. And it's not how leadership should be done. And when I mean leadership, I don't only mean managers. There's a lot of informal leadership within your teams, directly in contact with your teams. Probably everybody here is in some way a leader. There is a topic that you are leading. So it's not fire and forget. It's paying attention. That actually matters. Because anytime you don't, it means the people are not, they may have a skills gap because they don't know how to apply the thing that you've just given them. And that is something we often solve. So we understand if you switch from one tool to the other, hey, we have to put some hard skill guidance. But there's also often a collaboration gap, a communication or a coaching gap. So indeed, hey, do you feel comfortable starting to use this new pattern, or do you actually feel scared? And that's okay. What can we do to make the journey a little bit easier? These are the questions that we also should be asking whenever you're leading a change. If you don't, well, you owe a debt. You need to still repay that to the IT team. You won't get away with it. You will just suffer from the effects and the frustration. Like, hey, I gave you this gold-plated cool stuff and you're misusing it. Why don't you understand it? And that frustration is on you. So these are typically causes of social debt. And then if you read that carefully, it's inevitable that an agile transformation creates social debt. Because with an agile transformation, it's often not well explained to people. Why do we want to change it? And it's also often not well guided. Hey, does the Scrum Guide actually work for you? Do we maybe need to change some things on the Scrum Guide? That would be cursing almost. So an agile transformation inevitably leads to social debt. And then the funny thing is, often an agile transformation is combined with a very large this may not fail project. That's not a good idea. So you first want to guide your agile transformation and then rebuild your product, or the other way around, but not hand in hand, because it will induce failure. Example, another customer that we were consulting for, they did a DevOps transformation, which was actually not guided well. So it wasn't even a DevOps transformation, it was a biz DevOps transformation. So what they did is, well, we want all the teams to focus on the business. So a business owner is going to have full mandate on the budget, the direction, the backlog. They are going to fully decide what the teams are doing. Within a year, the product quality was never invested in anymore. So what happened is, when we talked to them, we asked, hey, why don't you do these upgrades to the system? Why don't you automate your certificate management? Why don't you? And the engineer said, well, because we never get time for it. We have a 1 time per month window, Sunday from 7 to 10, to do maintenance on the system. There's no other moment that we're allowed to change the system. So this is what happens when you combine an agile transformation and you lead it like the bird and you drop the shit because somebody said, hey, business is going to own it, and they never looked back. It goes wrong. And then at the end, business wasn't happy either, which is needless to say. So another example is, hey, how do we look at Scrum? So when I asked any developer, what do you think about Scrum? There are very, very few people who like it. And I think it really ties back to this priggish members community smell. I'm going to introduce the community smells a bit later, but priggish members are people who are so only talking about the process. Thou must follow the process, and if thou ever deviates from it, you will have a big problem and a lengthy conversation that you don't want to be in, right? So what happens is people, they start to disengage. They start to learn not to challenge the process because this person is going to be in all states about it. And you start not to care anymore. While if you actually read the Scrum Guide, it says, hey, the developers are always accountable for product quality. And they're also always accountable for holding each other accountable as professionals. The Scrum Master and the product owner was never allowed to micromanage you as a team, to tell you, you cannot invest in a little bit of tech debt repayment right now because we have different priorities. Because that's your responsibility, and it's actually in the Scrum Guide. So if they're all about the process, remind them of the process, because they are not following it. But the micromanagement that comes with this is bothering so many people that Scrum is never really going to work, because you're constantly incurring social debt. And you're losing your people, and you're losing the actual ability that they would have if you would give them freedom and mandate, which is quite a shame. So I'm not a big fan of Scrum. Next topic. So how do you actually identify social debt? Well, there's these community smells. I already introduced them a little bit, bless you. Community smells, they can actually serve like an early warning. So, they will tell you a little bit earlier that you have a problem. And this picture is actually spot on, because it's only a little bit earlier. There are still kind of lagging indicators. We just don't have a better measurement. Because once a community smell starts showing, well, you're already late. You already have to make an investment to repay it. So you would have wanted it sooner. But in the current state, where we are with this research, we simply don't have a better measurement than this. So community smells it is. At least we know it earlier than our company being really in deep shit. So how do you observe community smells? There's various ways, and it's still very exploratory. So as I said, we're going to do more research on it. But one way that has been that has been showing is social mapping. So we now have this dashboard running where we can see who approves whom's PRs, for instance, or who works on which code bases together with what other people. So you can actually see the social network as a map to see in your team, is there actually a split? Is there actually a lone wolf? Is there somebody who is so central in all communication that if this person would leave, everybody would have a problem because he is the glue holding everything together? You can map these things, which I think is very nice because you can actually observe them from your code. Another way is, well, for instance, there's a paper, they tried to detect it via Slack. I'm not a particular fan of this by the first idea of it, but at least the idea is, hey, if social is about communication and about collaboration, what if we do some like sensitivity analysis on all the communication we are doing to also help us uncover problems at this end of the spectrum? And of course, because of the relationship that community smells will result in code smells, you can also observe your code smells. And if you know how they are correlated, you can start seeing patterns. So that's another title of a paper that is doing just that. And they have a bunch of measurement frameworks. I really cannot deep dive into this. So if you want to know more, it's on you to Google. And in that case, I would happily connect to see where you're heading at this with this topic. Where are we at? Well, this is our dashboard right now. So we have a whole bunch of metrics on all kinds of factors. And for everything that we think is valuable to see as a measurement, well, we try to measure them in some way. And it's really a search right now. Some of the measurements are really not valuable. But what we're trying to do is simply serve people data, serve teams data, so that they themselves can start thinking, hey, what does this data tell me? Example, so this is individual WIP. Everybody knows individual work in progress. It's how much are you doing at the same time. If you have a lot of individual WIP, it might be that you're this central developer in the team that doesn't get to spend enough time on their own topics because you're helping everybody. It might also not be. So what we're trying to do is to just make it visible. Let the data speak for itself. So what you can see is we also anonymized it for this reason. We don't want blaming. That will make the social debt worse. But we just serve this as a team. Every team member knows who they are in this identification. And they can see, okay, so I really have a lot of individual WIP. What can I do to change that? What is the pattern behind it? That's what we're trying to do. And of course, you have to repay it. So once you identify it, what are you going to do to solve it? Because knowing is one thing, but if you don't solve it, you're still in shit. So then at least you could have never made any of these dashboards because they're not delivering any value in that case. So what do you do to repay? Well, drink beer. It's always something that works, right? So do things with your team. It helps to invest in people by being with people. But there's more things. For me, it's really important to solve the right problem with the right approach. So what I've seen happening is that because some manager or somebody from the team knows, hey, if we do more investment in knowledge, then things will go better. They start to just invest in knowledge because it's a pattern that worked for them in the past. But if you don't know what the problem is that you're having, then how do you know what approach is the best for you to take right now? So with identification, you should know, hey, what is the community smell that I'm suffering from? Because if you know the community smell, you also know how to solve it. Bit abstract. I'm going to try and use some examples again. So example of how it went wrong is this one. I just put it in my slides. This is something where we thought we had a knowledge issue. So we have a lot of dependencies, and we're working for a bank, so we have to update them for security and for maintainability of the system. So we installed Renovate, which automatically, whenever there's an upgrade available, it will run the pipeline, run our tests, make sure that there's a PR ready, and we only need to approve it. we're not allowed to automatically deploy to production because it's a regulated environment. We cannot do that. So the only thing we have to do is approve the PR request. At a certain stage, we had this whole thing running, and nobody was ever looking at the PR requests. So what one of the developers on the team did when I said, hey, nobody's ever solving them, he said, well, I'm going to make a Confluence page, and I'm going to show how far which library is behind. And even one step further, I don't know why it didn't come in the slide, but at the side, there's a link to the PR. So you only have to click it, then click yes, and you're done. So he made it very easy to do them. And then, if you look at it right now, we're still way behind. Because we never had a knowledge problem. We were solving the wrong problem. We actually had a culture and a coordination problem. It isn't clear when you should do this, who should do this. What is the belief we have? So how far are we allowed to be behind, and when should we take action? If we don't align on these things first, knowledge is not going to solve your problem. So we actually had a problem where we need to align on our beliefs and values. Do we actually think this is important? If not, we're having the wrong conversation. So that's an example where solving the wrong problem also does not give you the outcome. Just some examples out of my portfolio what did work. So we had a team cohesion problem at some stage, and we did an exercise. It's called Belbin. And Belbin will show you the preferred roles that any team member has. So some people will naturally start coordinating things. Even if you start playing a board game with them, they will be the people who start reading the rules and saying who should sit where, you know? So they're natural coordinators. Some people are natural socialists. They will always be connecting with people, asking, hey, how are you doing? And Belbin kind of created this structure with 9 roles with everybody's preference. So what we did is we did an exercise, everybody did a questionnaire, and we were mapping the team structure to this. And what we saw is we had only one shaper. And the shaper is a person who brings things from idea to action. While we had a whole bunch of completer finishers and implementers. And these people are people who want to understand ideas better and better and better before they start, because otherwise something may go wrong. So you can understand that in the composition of this team, there was a bias to never start. And that's actually what we saw. He was the only one being a coordinator. So if we had another person being a coordinator, well, this person would have also a bit complimented on the lack of a drive to start, because a coordinator will say, but we have to follow the plan. In this case, there was the same person. And there was a lot of internal focus, because nobody had the role of resource investigator, which is a complex name to say the person who asks other people how they solved it. So it had a strong internal focus. Nobody ever asked the customer, do you like the product? Because it was a strong internal focus. And once we were aware of that, that really helped. So what we at least saw was, okay, this person is really lonesome, because he's always pushing the team to start, and he is also always the person who has to hold people accountable for not following the plan. So what we did is, after we were aware on this, we asked people, what role are you comfortable with, though it's not your natural tendency to pick up? So some people stepped into the resource investigator, some people into coordinator, and some people into shaper, which really allowed the team to be more effective, but also have much more fun together. So it's a bit of a complex exercise, but it's an example of how you can actually thrive through attention on the right problem, because you uncover these kind of things. So this is how the exercise looked like. So we had a bunch of fun. And if you have communication problems, well, I cannot cover that all, but I think that Jackie covers it very well in her book, Communication Patterns. What we had particularly as a challenge is there was somebody who was like real senior on the team. And at that stage, we had a lot of applications that were not so interesting, truthfully. So when there came this new application, the senior thought, I'm going to do that, and I'm not going to allow anybody else to touch this, because then I can do the interesting work, and all the other people can do the non-interesting work, which was quite a selfish choice. And how he did that? Well, today we're still suffering from not having proper communication on this particular system. Nobody wants to touch it because this sharing villainy means actually you don't share anything. You don't enable anybody to work together on your system because, well, people simply don't understand it. You create complex clauses to push the rest out. It's not a kind thing to do. And how can you solve that? Well, communication patterns will help you to also get the structure in place and say, hey, this is what we agreed on. And you can then challenge this person to follow this process. So it can help you to actually deal with this kind of person. And we had this situation where we had a culture problem. So our company has 3 founders, and at a certain stage, they thought it's time for us to step back. And that's a big leadership change. The 3 founders stepped back all at once and left the company in the hands of 9 others. And what happened is that we lost a lot of understanding of the why behind our cultural values. So we started to be a bit of an imitator instead of truly understanding why are you doing this. So what we did is, well, the founders actually came back to explain in sessions, like what is the why behind it. So we have culture cafes, we have DNA sessions, we have a DNA description. We have some people who are culture carriers. They start sharing the story of what is the why behind this value in our DNA. Because if you don't explain that, people start misinterpreting it. And that actually can hurt your company. So for instance, we have no managers, so that means we work with consent. Everybody has to approve with a certain idea. And at a certain stage, somebody of marketing thought of a new signature. And some people were not agreeing and saying, I don't consent, you have to change it. And consent in our company was never meant to be like this. Consent was for the people who are key stakeholders. They are allowed to say something, but you're not a key stakeholder in this topic. You're not allowed to just bash on any colleague to put in your own opinion. That's a very big difference. So we had to retell that story. What does consent mean? How does it work? What are the boundaries of this type of thing? So when we started explaining, people started understanding again, and now it's really functioning well. It's also important to repay as quickly as possible, because the longer you leave it, the more it will hurt. So at the beginning, it's just one person, then it's the team, then it's the organization, and at the end, it's ingrained in culture. Once you're there, you're in trouble, because then you need to do a culture program. They don't work. So you have to repay early. There's an example. So this is I constantly make mistakes. I just put them all on slides. So this is my most recent customer I'm working with, and we have 5 teams. It's a very big team. So it's normally we have 1 customer, 1 team. That is one of our cultural values. And in this one team, we make the decisions together. This is this consent that I just explained. And in this case, it was just too big to handle. You cannot put 40 people in one team and say, hey, discuss everything together. So we split them up. And what naturally happened is that, well, we adopted 3 different clouds. We adopted, well, any variety in tech that we could think of, basically. And then what happened is that we also made different people responsible for the different teams. And now we're at the stage that we thought, well, this is very dysfunctional. It's costing us a lot of extra effort. We cannot share any of the foundations. We cannot share any of the platforms. We cannot share knowledge. We cannot share people. We're in trouble. And now we're trying to get back to saying, hey, what if we choose one cloud? What if we align a bit on tech stack? We don't have to do everything exactly the same, but at least where we can work with the same tech, let's do so. But right now, because it's different people, we really suffer from a community smell called solution defiance. So everybody now wants to win. Nobody wants to give in to the other, saying, okay, let's go with your solution. Because that means that they have the knowledge gap, they have to invest in changing their solution, and nobody wants to make this investment. So this is an example of repaying too late. We should have seen this earlier. We should have acted earlier, because now we have very big, lengthy sessions to try and solve this. I don't know how it's going yet, because this is in the middle of where we're at. So let's see. I hope I gave you an introduction to social debt, that you have an overview of how it impacts you, what causes social debt, how you can identify it, and how you can repay it. As I said, it's just inspirational. I hope you have some inspiration from the overview, and that you will be triggered to look into it a bit more deeply, because it's actually killing your systems. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much.